Greetings, everyone. We'll wait just a couple of minutes for attendees to file in. Well, let's go ahead and get started. Again, I'd like to say greetings to everybody. We're delighted to have you join us for today's webinar, 5 School Districts Where Multilingualism is Thriving and What They Have in Common. I'm your host, Ned Buffin, Demand Generation Specialist at Cricket eLearning. At Cricket eLearning, we specialize in customized training in 10 languages, catering to companies, schools and libraries, adults, and youth. A bit of housekeeping for today's session. The question and answer box will remain open throughout the webinar and will respond to questions after both panelists have presented. And a reminder that captions are available for those who wish to enable them. Our first panelist today will be Dr. Victor Antonio Lozada. Dr. Lozada is an assistant professor of bilingual education in the School of Education at the University of North Texas, Dallas, where he serves as the program coordinator for the early childhood through 12th grade languages other than English program. His research includes the intersections among bilingual education, literacy learning, and music education. He frequently presents on these topics at international and national venues, such as the National Association for Bilingual Education, La Cosecha Dual Language Conference, the National Association for Music Education Conference, the American Educational Research Association, and the American Orff Schulwerk Association. His research can be found in the Bilingual Research Journal, NABE Journal of Research and Practice, the Journal of Language and Literacy Education, Literacy Research and Instruction, and the Journal of General Music Education, among others. He also offers suggestions for how secondary teachers can engage their students in being critical about curricula in his co-edited book, Engage and Empower, Expanding the Curriculum for Justice and Activism, especially his chapters on rap music and anti-racism. He serves as the Vice President-elect of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and Access for the American Orff Schulwerk Association. Our second panelist will be Dr. Xiomara Rivera Pagán, Director of eLearning at Cricket Media. Dr. Rivera Pagán has over a decade of experience with the language learners in multilingual environments. She's held leadership positions, pioneered language programs, and advocated for language learning programs locally, nationally, and internationally. In addition to having worked in the school system, Dr. Rivera Pagán serves on the board of directors with Cultura Planera and the Third. Dr. Rivera Pagán co-founded the nonprofit Cultura Planera, committed to creating community spaces in which families and individuals can learn, participate in, and promote the traditional Puerto Rican musical styles of bamba and plena. Today, Dr. Lozada will describe the criteria that we evaluated in determining which districts are flourishing. He will identify these districts and present the data supporting why these districts are exceptional. Dr. Rivera Pagán will share the qualities these districts have in common that contribute to their success. She will also suggest what districts and schools can do to improve their performance. Today, we aim to provide attendees with a deeper understanding of high-performing school districts. We will explore how to define these districts, pinpoint successful examples, and uncover the key elements contributing to their achievements. Additionally, we will identify actionable steps to replicate these strategies in other contexts. Now I'd like to introduce Dr. Lozada, who will review a few key terms before exploring the details of our study. Welcome, Dr. Lozada.
Thank you, Ned. Bienvenidos a todos and welcome everyone. We are so glad that you're here today. And I'm just going to lay a foundation of what we mean by some of the terminology that we'll be discussing throughout the webinar. And the first is English learner, or EL, which means someone who is acquiring English as an additional language, whereas a multilingual learner who's learning multiple languages simultaneously, and they might be in what's called a dual language program, where many models have 50-50, where there's 2 languages that are learned side by side. to develop biliteracy, bilingualism, and biculturalism. And that is also a two-way immersion program where they're being immersed in the culture and the literacies and the languages of both language groups. So the criteria we used for understanding how these school districts were performing well were that they needed the high multilingual population, again, about 2 to 3 times the national average. So you need a large group of certain language groups. And that they also had dual language or two-way immersion programming. So this is available throughout the experience. So not only are there dual language programs happening in early childhood through 5th grade and what's typically called the primary or elementary years, they extend that through the 12th grade and a secondary school to include dual enrollment and seal of biliteracy to have a full language program throughout educational experiences. And of note is that the assessments for success we measured those in the form of graduation rates and the National Assessment of Educational Progress, the NAEP scores. So when we start discussing about the measurements, that's where the testing scores are coming from, the NAEP, rather than some state assessment data or other types of data. So those are the scores that we're referring to, and of course the graduation rates. So where it's working, I'm going to detail 5 different school districts throughout the United States and how they are impacting their students. And Dr. Rivera Pagán will extend on that information as well. And I hope you can find those similarities between all of them. So again, there will be a Burlington Edison School District in Washington State, ABC Unified in California, 2 school districts in Texas, Carrollton Farmers Branch in Austin, and Miami Dade in Florida. So we'll start with ABC Unified, which is an urban district in California with a population of about 21,000 students. And in that school district, there are 30 schools that range from kindergarten through high school, 12th grade. And the multilingual population is very high at 42.8% as have households identifying as that, which is well above the national average. And then of those students, 23.6% are identified as receiving EL services or English language or English learner services. And then there's one two-way immersion program at the elementary level. There's English language development, a seal of biliteracy, a district English advisory council, an English learner master plan, a language assessment center, and then they also utilize Title I and Title III funding to fund these programs. So when we look at ABC Unified, we see the high graduation rates for an urban school district of about 84%, and 100% of the teachers are licensed by the state of California. Many of the teachers, 94%, are experienced with 3 or more years, and then the state funding is the primary funding source at about 70%. And as I mentioned before, there were about 23.6% of the learners who are receiving those English language services, and then there were no NAEP data for that school district. And Austin Independent School District is a metroplex in Texas, and the student population is about 73,000 students enrolled in about 116 elementary, middle, high, early college, academy, magnet, alternative, and community schools. And again, the multilingual population is high and above the national average at about 37.3%. And of those families who identify with multilingual households, 28.2% receive emergent bilingual services, or as we label it, English learner services. The district has dual language programming in 65 schools, which includes an international baccalaureate program, the middle years and the high school, and as well as a refugee and immigrant services. So when we look at Austin Independent School District's data, again, high graduation rates with 93% of students graduating, 96% of the teachers are licensed by the state, 85% of the teachers are highly experienced with 3 or more years, and then a high level of primary local funding as their source. And again, reiterating this, the 28% of students receiving English learner services, and according to the NAEP, 40% reading proficiency and 53% reading proficiency at high school, 40% at elementary. Our next school district is in Washington, and this is Burlington Edison School District. This is in a different context, and this is in a small suburban district in Washington State with a population of about 3,000 students enrolled in 23 schools from pre-K through 12th grade. The multilingual population is about 34% of families, and then of those families, 23% of the students receive English learner services. This district has 3 schools with dual language programming available to students. So when we look at Burlington Edison School District's data, we see that there is a high graduation rate again at about 90%. 100% of the teachers are licensed. 92% of the teachers have many years of experience, 3 or more. And then the primary funding source is the state. Like I had indicated before, the 23% of the students receiving EL services, they also have the NAEP data of elementary reading proficiency at 39%, and in high school, 67% reading proficiency. Our next school district is from Miami Dade County in Florida, which is a large suburban school district with a population of about 334,000 students enrolled in 542 schools from pre-K to 12th. And of note, this is the 3rd largest school district in the nation. So it's important to see the wide variety of types of school districts that are being successful in these contexts. The multilingual population consisted of about 70% of the families, and of those families, 23% received English learner services. And again, there's programming for dual language at 12 different school sites. And when we dive into Miami-Dade's data, we see, again, high graduation rates, about 94% of students, high rates of teachers being licensed at about 97%, many teachers coming with experiences of 3 or more years at 78%, and the primary funding source being local. With those 23% of students receiving English learner services, we find at the elementary level, 52% have reading proficiency according to the NAEP, and 51% have reading proficiency at the high school level. The next school district I want to highlight is a special one to me because I work with this school district a lot, and that's Carrollton Farmers Branch ISD. And they're a large suburban district in North Texas of a population of about 27,000 students enrolled in 40 schools from pre-K to 12th grade. The multilingual population, again, is high and higher than the state average and the national average of about 55% families. And of those families, 38% receive emergent bilingual services or English learner services. 3 school sites have direct dual language programming. And when we dive into their data, we find, again, high graduation rates at about 92%, high rates of teachers who are licensed by the state at about 95%, teachers with 3 or more years of experience at 88%, 75% of that funding comes from the local sources. And of that, about 39% EL service, students receiving English learner services. According to the NAEP, 37% are at reading proficiency at the elementary level, and 42% are at the high school level. To give you a little bit more context of Carrollton Farmers Branch, I have the opportunity of working with this school district, and they are about not only what would be considered typical content areas, reading, writing, science, math. They are engaging their multilingual learners throughout the curriculum. As I worked with all of the fine arts teachers, they were focusing on how they can best serve those students in cultural ways. So at football games, you'll see ballet folclóricos, you'll see mariachi at the elementary level, and you'll see children learning traditional dances from their cultures. And at this time, I'm going to pass off to Dr. Rivera Pagán to explain us a little bit more about what is working through these schools.
Thank you, Dr. Lozada. And I really love how you highlighted the fact that there's so much diversity, but within all of that diversity, I can imagine that as we were listening to Dr. Lozada, we saw some patterns kind of popping up. And so what is working is that these districts have certified teachers. And so they're either seeking out teachers that are certified, about 90%, and the teachers also have significant experience, or they're coming up with alternative ways in order to support the certification of those teachers. So it is really important to bring in that new teaching staff so that we continue to support the teachers who are newer to the workforce, but also while doing so, create this reciprocal model where our more experienced teachers are then supporting those newer teachers. What is working is that the teacher certification, according to a 2011 study by the National Center for Education Statistics, a little less than a third of surveyed teachers have opportunities for professional development and working with multilingual learners. Fewer than half of the educators sampled had taken one course dedicated to instructing multilingual learners before first year of teaching, and rigorous teaching standards in these districts help partner experienced and knowledgeable teachers with students. So it's really important that we're setting up our teachers, our leaders for success in preparing for this growing demographic so that they can support and feel confident in their teaching. Differentiating programs. So all of the districts used a mix of language training programs. And so of the 5 districts, although they had diverse language programming, what was really consistent is that they're using promotion-oriented language. So they are promoting multilingualism throughout their district. So all 5 districts use language within their policies that support both the advancement of English and, this is critical, the maintenance of home language with key phrases like are afforded full opportunity, not remain enrolled in a newcomer center, participate with English speaking peers, and participating in bilingual or ESL. So there are a variety of ways that we can support our students, but what is really critical is the mindset that we are supporting our teachers and our leaders and understanding that our students are coming with all of this linguistic ability. And so how are we leveraging it to support the advancement of English and as well as the maintenance of any additional languages that are within our districts. Funding uses. So primary expense of all 5 districts is instructional expenditures. So they are focused on salaries, benefits, purchase services, and supplies. So it's going directly into the classrooms, working with students, working with teachers. 4 of the 5 districts had most of funding coming from local budgets. So they really have an understanding of what their teachers, their students, their communities need, and they can be flexible in meeting the needs. Early childhood education. So all 5 districts provide early childhood instruction and follow that language and academic support, like Dr. Lozada mentioned, not only in the primary years, but all the way into 12th grade with the seal of biliteracy. And so research shows that the sooner that schools prioritize home language maintenance when possible, the more access students have to additional languages by bridging their language and academic skills from one language to the other. And so in best case scenarios, there are these dual language and two-way immersion programs where you can support the teaching of academic and social language within the classroom and within the school. And also there are practices that we can do within our school systems in order to leverage that language and create space in order to honor that linguistic diversity. So what can we do? We're hearing all of these great ideas, and we're probably thinking to ourselves, what can I practically do? We've heard that in smaller districts to larger districts, there is a wide variety that we can do, but what's consistent is planning. So planning according to the languages present in the community. So in schools and communities where there's a large group of home language speakers, for example, Spanish speakers or Chinese speakers, we can start to work to thoughtfully implement dual language programs and two-way immersion programs in order to leverage those language skills. This creates a mutually beneficial relationship where both language abilities and communities are valued. And in spaces, because there are parts of our school systems where there are a lot of linguistic diversity, and that dual language or two-way immersion program may be a little bit less practical, but there's still spaces where students have more varied linguistic backgrounds, and English learner programs with promotion-oriented implementation could support students and teachers in maximizing human resources. So again, how are we thinking about the ways that we are adding to our students' toolkit by supporting their English acquisition and also trying to build bridges from their home language into that English acquisition rather than disconnecting? What can we do? We can strengthen our teacher preparation programs. And this is also something that we're hearing from a lot of teachers, that they would support something that makes them feel more confident within those multilingual settings. So school districts and teacher prep programs should consider how they are using professional development to increase the capacity of teachers to work with multilingual learners, including supporting them in their target language. And we can start to work towards hiring certified teachers with experience, strengthening the network of models and mentors rather than overextending less experienced teachers, which can often lead to burnout. We can reassess our budget allocation. And so something that's really critical is that our schools often have limited resources. And so we have competing priorities. And so the more that we can be thoughtful and critical about using our resources in a way that leverages what research is showing that supports not only multilingual learners, but a variety of students. If school districts have dual language and two-way programming, ensure resources are strategically placed in schools where multilingual learners who can be used as language models. We can invest in teachers who are more qualified and experienced. That return on investment far outweighs the additional cost. And we can fully utilize bridging home and new language. So in conclusion, what are our takeaways? We understand that our school systems are pressed for resources. There's an unprecedented teacher shortage, particularly in area of language instruction. There are budget constraints, and the multilingual student community is growing. And so how do we consider this an opportunity? We can look at what is working. We can look at the districts that are already doing a wonderful job of supporting multilingualism in all their variety. And instead of reinventing the wheel, figure out actions from those 5 districts so that we can leverage our unique linguistic profiles, our unique programs, our unique and local budgets. All of that comes together so that we can take some of the wins from those districts and start to make some tweaks and some adjustments so that it fits our local needs.
Thank you, Xiomara. That was truly motivating. Now I'd like to welcome any questions our attendees have for Victor and Xiomara. No questions so far. Seems like one of our questions was answered during the presentation. Please feel
Ned,
free to.
Could I ask Dr. Lozada a question from his work?
Yeah, please do.
Okay, because I'd love to hear a little bit more, especially because the fine arts is often similar to language learning programs, a space where we feel like there are competing priorities, underfunded. And so what would you say to individuals or schools that feel that they have to choose between an initiative to either support a multilingual program or the fine arts?
So I think it's important to consider what bilingualism we want to motivate, right? And part of that is culture, and home language and culture are so intertwined, you can't take them apart. And the fine arts are culture. And what I found in my research is that children, especially young children who are working in the fine arts, are developing their language together. In my research, I found that children with high musical aptitude also have high rates of early literacy indicators like phonological awareness and morphological awareness. And so these fine arts programs are directly benefiting students in their language acquisition. And not only that, we're also supporting the home culture and the home language to be sustained, because when they have these experiences, like we saw the mariachi, the ballet folklorico, in that particular context, it happens throughout the curriculum rather than being segmented and we're going to learn to read and write in these languages. Children can begin to see how it's fully an integrated curriculum and that they're able to grow and develop further.
That's beautiful.
Thank you,
And
Dr. Yeah.
Of course, no, I think that there's a good amount of research that we understand, and it's usually in a monolingual setting. So to hear that in a multilingual setting that we receive those same benefits and that we can essentially make tweaks in order to make connections to the local community, it's really inspiring.
Well, I have a question for you, Dr. Rivera Pagán. I know that you've developed an ebook with all of this information, and I'm wondering, in your research of all these school districts, what were some of the things you found were not there? What were the absent things for the ones that you excluded from this? What were they missing?
So often there's so you can kind of flip it. So
Mhm.
it would be spaces in which there isn't that promotion-oriented language, spaces in which teachers aren't certified, or they don't have high levels of teachers who have a significant amount of experience. And it's not to say that there isn't opportunities for the diversity of teacher experience, right? But we want that opportunity for those more experienced teachers to mentor the more novice teachers, and vice versa. So we're seeing a couple of those patterns, I think. Oh, it looks like we might have something in the chat.
Yeah, it looks like we have a question here. Okay, yeah, we have a question from Julian. Are DL and TWI programs to be implemented simultaneously, or which would you recommend should be implemented first?
That's a really good question. Do you want to take it, Dr. Lozada?
Sure. I think it goes back to the know your community, right? And to know which programs would be most beneficial. Another area of my research is the gentrification of bilingual education and ensuring that when we implement dual language programs or two-way immersion programs, that we're aware of who is being included and what types of people are there. Of course, we want the language minoritized students, but in order to make a dual language program work, you also need the English dominant students to balance it. And so I would encourage knowing first your community and then looking at that fine line of how are you supporting the language maintenance of your English learners while also balancing in a two-way immersion program, having English dominant students in that and what that would mean for both types of students.
That's beautiful. I think that's such a good question. Julian or Julian, I appreciate you asking it. I think there are a lot of similarities between dual language and two-way immersion programs. Dual language programs do a really beautiful job of looking at that cultural piece that Dr. Lozada was mentioning. So looking at the community is a huge piece of doing it in a thoughtful and inclusive way, mindfully, right? The other piece is thinking about how you want to implement the timing of it, how you want to integrate it into, do you want a 50-50 model? Do you want to start with a certain language and then transition into the other language? There are a lot of concepts. So which would you recommend be implemented first? I think either of them can be implemented. The question goes back to what Dr. Lozada said about who is the community that you're serving, and what are your language goals? What are your academic goals? How are you trying to essentially amplify those minoritized languages? And can you do it in terms of timing? What does that look like? What about a school district of about 25% Spanish speaking? I think that that's a solid, significant demographic that, again, the interesting part of the districts that we were looking at look at specifically where those dual language programs are placed. If you can do it in the earlier years and then maintain, because sometimes the funding isn't there. And so essentially you start it in the early years and then it kind of trickles off. And ideally, to Dr. Lozada's point from earlier, we're doing it from elementary all the way to 12th grade. And so if you can even do that in certain sections of your district in order to support those linguistic communities, I think that that's best practices, but 25% is pretty significant. That it sounds like you have some language models on the Spanish side in order to support maybe some English language models as well.
And I'm going to add just a little bit to that. So again, 25%, that does meet the line of about 2 to 3 times the national average, right? But always consider when you're working with Spanish speakers is that it's not a monolith, right? Dr. Rivera Pagán is Boricua. She's from Puerto Rico. I'm from a Mexican heritage. And so even our way we interact with the language and the culture is different. And so just having that awareness of how that would function within the schools that would be implementing these programs.
That's beautiful. And I think these questions are the right questions to be asking. So sometimes we can get overwhelmed with the to-do list, especially teachers and leaders, especially within public schools. There's so much that we want to do. And at the same time, there are little steps that we can take in the right direction in order to support multilingualism and or those specific linguistic communities. So exactly what Dr. Lozada said. And at the same time, don't be shy about, okay, well, I don't know where to start. If do I start asking them where is their linguistic community? Where's their cultural background? I think having the conversation is really important and not shying away from it just because we have a good amount to do, because there will always be a way that we can continue working to be better. And that's the beauty of being in education.
And my favorite adage with this is, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. You take it one little step and you keep moving forward.
Absolutely.
Terrific. Seems like we have no more questions, so we'll move on. Before we conclude, I'd like to provide some information on how you can follow up with us to learn more. Please contact Harry Higinbotham, Sales Director, at his email address, hhiginbotham@cricketmedia.com. I'll go ahead and put Harry's contact details in the chat. There you go. Well, this concludes today's webinar. Thank you for joining Cricket eLearning's discussion, 5 school districts where multilingualism is thriving and what they have in common. We hope you found the session valuable and invite you to participate in our future discussions. Your engagement is important to us, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you so much.